The Zephyrian marketplace buzzed with activity as thousands of beings from across the galaxy conducted their daily business. Towering Krillians with their crystalline exoskeletons negotiated prices with fluid-bodied Aquarians, while small, quick Vex darted between the legs of larger species carrying messages and small parcels. The air hummed with the translation devices that allowed this diverse collection of species to communicate, creating a constant background noise of electronic chirps and whirs. Sarah Chen moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her human form drawing no attention whatsoever. To the casual observer, she appeared to be just another trader from one of the newer species, unremarkable in her simple brown clothing and modest cybernetic implants. Her appearance was so ordinary that even the security scanners seemed to pass over her without interest. This was exactly what she wanted. The Galactic Council had made a critical error when they classified humans as a Class 7 species, technologically inferior, physically weak, and mentally limited. Sarah smiled grimly as she remembered the official report that described humans as barely capable of basic tool use and lacking any significant evolutionary advantages. The Council's xenobiologists had somehow missed the one trait that made humans truly dangerous in a galaxy full of specialized species: their ability to adapt and blend in anywhere. While other species had evolved for specific environments and roles, humans had developed something far more valuable: the capacity to observe, learn, and mimic. Where Akrillian's rigid crystal structure made them incredible engineers but terrible at deception, and where a Vex's speed made them perfect messengers but obvious in crowds, humans could become whatever the situation required. Sarah had spent 3 years on Zephyr Prime, slowly building her cover identity as a small-time electronics trader while she gathered intelligence on the Council's military installations. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very marketplace she now walked through had been built using human labor. When the Council had discovered Earth, they had quickly enslaved the primitive human population, shipping millions across the galaxy to work in mines, factories, and construction sites. What they hadn't realized was that every human worker was also a potential spy, observer, and saboteur. Humans didn't just work. They watched, learned, and remembered everything. Sarah paused at a fruit vendor's stall, examining the exotic produce while her enhanced hearing picked up a conversation between 2 Council security officers stationed nearby. They were discussing the increased security measures around the orbital defense platform, mentioning specific patrol schedules and access codes with the casual indifference of beings who believed they were surrounded only by lesser species and slaves. She purchased a small bag of sweet fruit while memorizing every detail of their conversation. The vendor, an elderly Aquarian whose translucent blue form rippled with each movement, handed her the fruit with what passed for a smile among his species. "You have been coming here for a long time, yes? I remember your face. Not many of your kind in this sector." Sarah nodded politely, maintaining her cover while internally noting that even friendly interactions were intelligence-gathering opportunities. The Aquarian's casual observation told her that humans were still relatively rare on Zephyr Prime, which meant her presence was more noticeable than she'd hoped. As she moved away from the stall, Sarah's trained eyes cataloged everything around her: the placement of security cameras, the patrol patterns of the guards, the flow of foot traffic through different sections of the marketplace. Where other species saw chaos, humans saw patterns. Where others saw random movement, humans recognized systems and routines that could be exploited. This ability to find order in apparent chaos had allowed human resistance cells to operate undetected throughout Council space for over a decade. Her wrist communicator vibrated, with a subtle pattern that only she would recognize as significant. The signal meant that the other members of her cell had successfully completed their missions. Marcus had infiltrated the Spaceport Authority, Lisa had gained access to the communications hub, and David had established himself within the Council's administrative offices. Each of them had used humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to become invisible in plain sight. Sarah made her way toward the commercial district, where she maintained a small shop that served as both her cover and her base of operations. The shop sold genuine Earth electronics, items that the Council considered primitive curiosities but which actually contained sophisticated human technology disguised as simple devices. Her customers included Council officials who enjoyed collecting quaint artifacts from backward worlds. never realizing they were purchasing the very tools that would be used against them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the towering spires of the city as Sarah walked, and she couldn't help but think about the chain of events that had led to this moment. The Council's initial conquest of Earth had seemed absolute, but they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating their new slaves. Humans had a saying that other species found puzzling: it's better to be underestimated than overestimated. The Council was about to learn exactly what that meant. As she reached her shop, Sarah noticed a familiar figure browsing the stalls across the street. Commander Vextar of the Council Security Force, one of the few beings on Zephyr Prime who might recognize her if he looked too closely. She had encountered him briefly during her early days on the planet, when he had questioned her about her background. The meeting had been routine, but Vexitar had struck her as more observant than most Council officials. She would need to be careful around him. Sarah activated the shop's security system with a gesture that appeared to be adjusting her hair, but actually triggered a complex series of countermeasures built into the building structure. If the Council ever discovered her true identity, they would find nothing but an empty shell filled with decoy equipment. The real command center lay 3 levels underground, accessible only through hidden passages that exploited the Zephyrian architecture in ways its builders had never intended. Tonight would be the beginning of the end for the Council's occupation of the Outer Rim, but first, she had a shop to run and a cover to maintain. The evening crowds in the entertainment district provided perfect cover for Sarah's real work. While other species required specific environmental conditions or social structures to operate effectively, humans thrived in the chaotic mixture of different cultures and beings that populated Zephyr Prime's nightlife. Sarah had discovered that bars and clubs were particularly useful for intelligence gathering, as alcohol and recreational substances affected most species in ways that loosened their tongues considerably. She entered the Nebula's Edge, a popular establishment that catered to off-duty council personnel and wealthy traders. The club's atmosphere was carefully controlled to accommodate multiple species, sections with different gravity levels, atmospheric compositions, and lighting spectrums. Sarah moved toward the section designed for carbon-based humanoids, where the environment most closely resembled Earth normal conditions. This gave her a natural advantage as she could operate at peak efficiency, while others struggled with environmental adjustments. At the bar, she ordered a drink that appeared to be a popular Zephyrian cocktail, but was actually a mild stimulant that enhanced her already impressive human cognitive abilities. While other species became impaired by recreational substances, humans had evolved a remarkable ability to function effectively under the influence of various chemicals. This evolutionary quirk, developed through millennia of exposure to diverse toxins and drugs, now served as another tool in her arsenal. A group of council engineers occupied a nearby table, their conversation growing louder as the evening progressed. Sarah positioned herself within hearing range while appearing to focus on her drink and the club's entertainment. The engineers were discussing the new orbital defense system, complaining about design flaws and implementation problems with the casual arrogance of experts who believed themselves to be among intellectual superiors. What they didn't realize was that the flaws they were discussing had been deliberately introduced by human slaves working in the construction crews. While the council saw humans as simple manual laborers, they had actually been placing highly trained saboteurs in key positions throughout their infrastructure. Every human worker was a potential agent, and every construction project became an opportunity for long-term strategic planning. Sarah's enhanced memory recorded every technical detail the engineers revealed. Humans possessed an unusual ability to retain and cross-reference vast amounts of seemingly unrelated information, a trait that made them exceptional intelligence operatives. Where other species specialized in specific types of data processing, humans excelled at finding connections between disparate pieces of information and constructing comprehensive pictures from incomplete data. As the evening progressed, Sarah moved through different areas of the club, each time positioning herself near groups of council personnel and civilians who might possess useful information. Her ability to modulate her behavior and speech patterns allowed her to blend seamlessly into various social circles. To a group of military officers, she presented herself as a slightly naive trader, interested in shipping contracts. To a cluster of civilian administrators, she became a concerned business owner, worried about new regulations. This social adaptability was another uniquely human trait that the Council had failed to recognize. While other species maintained relatively fixed behavioral patterns based on their evolutionary background, humans could consciously alter their personality and approach based on social requirements, what the Council interpreted as lack of distinct cultural identity, was actually humanity's greatest strength, the ability to become whatever the situation demanded. Near midnight, Sarah encountered something unexpected. As she moved through the club's upper level, she spotted a familiar face in the VIP section. Another human, but one she didn't recognize from any resistance cell. The woman was well-dressed, clearly wealthy, and appeared to be enjoying the company of several high-ranking council officials. Either this was a deep-cover operative Sarah hadn't been briefed about, or something far more concerning was happening. Sarah used her wrist communicator to take discreet photos while maintaining her cover as a slightly intoxicated trader, exploring the club's more exclusive areas. The unknown human woman moved with confidence and familiarity among the council officials, suggesting a relationship that went far beyond casual social interaction. This could mean several things, none of them good for the resistance. The possibility that some humans had genuinely collaborated with the council was something the resistance leadership had always feared, but hoped to avoid. Human adaptability was a double-edged weapon. The same traits that made them excellent resistance fighters could also make them effective collaborators if they chose that path. Sarah would need to investigate this woman carefully without compromising her own mission. As she prepared to leave the club, Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up a fragment of conversation from the VIP section that made her blood run cold. The unknown human woman was discussing reliability, issues with the newest batch of workers, and enhanced screening, procedures for future acquisitions. She wasn't just collaborating with the council, she was actively involved in the human slave trade. Sarah forced herself to maintain her cover while every instinct screamed at her to take immediate action. The woman she was observing had not only betrayed her own species, but was actively helping the council to enslave more humans. The resistance had protocols for dealing with collaborators, but those protocols assumed they would encounter them in controlled circumstances, not in the middle of a crowded club surrounded by council security. She made her way toward the exit, mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. The collaborative human clearly had access to high-level council operations, which meant she possessed intelligence that could be valuable to the resistance. But extracting that information would require careful planning and possibly compromising Sarah's own deep-cover mission. Outside the club, the cool night air helped clear Sarah's head as she walked back toward her shop. The streets were quieter now, with only a few late-night workers and security patrols moving through the commercial district. She used the time to process what she had learned and to plan her next moves. The resistance cell would need to know about the collaborator, but Sarah would also need to continue her primary mission. As she reached her shop, Sarah noticed that something was wrong. The security system showed normal readings, but her human intuition detected subtle signs that someone had been watching the building. A scuff mark near the entrance that hadn't been there earlier, a slight displacement in the dust pattern on a nearby windowsill, the way the shadows fell differently around the doorway. Other species relied on their technology to detect threats, but humans had retained the predator's instinct for sensing when they were being hunted. Sarah activated her emergency protocols, sending coded signals to the other members of her cell while beginning the process of cleaning her shop of any potentially incriminating evidence. If the council was beginning to suspect her true identity, she would need to accelerate her timeline significantly. The orbital defense platform operation that had been planned for next week might need to happen much sooner. Dawn brought new challenges as Sarah discovered the full extent of the surveillance that had been placed on her shop during the night. The council's monitoring devices were sophisticated, but followed predictable patterns based on their understanding of normal criminal behavior. What they hadn't accounted for was human creativity and the ability to think outside established parameters. Sarah had spent years studying council security protocols, and she knew their systems were designed to catch members of known criminal species, not humans operating with entirely different methodologies. She began her morning routine exactly as she had for the past 3 years, opening her shop and arranging the displays of Earth electronics, while her enhanced senses catalogued every new surveillance device. The council had been thorough, but not thorough enough. They had placed their monitoring equipment in locations that would be optimal for observing Zephyrian or Krillian criminal activity, but humans operated differently. They thought in 3 dimensions where most species thought in 2. They used time as a tactical element, where others saw it as a simple progression, and they could find alternative solutions where others saw only direct approaches. Her first customer of the day was Commander Vexitar himself, a development that confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the previous night's surveillance. The Council Security Force commander browsed her displays with casual interest, but Sarah could see the way his multifaceted eyes tracked every detail of her shop and behavior. Vexitar was more intelligent than most Council officials, and his species possessed enhanced pattern recognition abilities that made him particularly dangerous to undercover operatives. "Fascinating items you have here," Vexitar said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into standard galactic. "These primitive human devices have a certain charm to them. I understand your species created these before they understood the principles of quantum processing or dimensional storage." Sarah nodded politely while internally noting that Vexitar was fishing for information about her background and knowledge level. "Yes, Commander. My people were quite inventive despite our technological limitations. These devices represent thousands of years of gradual development." Sarah's response was carefully crafted to reinforce the Council's prejudices about human intelligence while avoiding any statements that could be verified or contradicted. The art of misdirection was something humans had perfected over millennia of social interaction, and it served them well in intelligence. Work Vexitar picked up a device that appeared to be a simple communication unit but actually contained quantum encryption technology that surpassed anything in the Council's current arsenal. The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah. She was watching a Council security commander examine the very technology that would soon be used to coordinate strikes against Council installations throughout the sector. "I'm particularly interested in how your species developed these interfaces," Vexitar continued. "The ergonomic design suggests an understanding of neural pathway optimization that seems advanced for such a primitive culture." This was dangerous territory. Vexitar was clearly more knowledgeable about human capabilities than his official report suggested, which meant either he had conducted independent research or he had access to classified information about human resistance activities. Sarah responded with a carefully modulated display of pride and defensiveness that she had observed in other humans when discussing their species' achievements. "We may not have achieved faster than light travel or dimensional manipulation, but humans have always excelled at making tools that work well with our natural capabilities." The statement was technically true while revealing nothing about current human technological abilities or resistance activities. After Vexitar left, Sarah activated her emergency communication protocols. The other members of her cell needed to know that Council security was taking a more active interest in their activities, and they would need to accelerate their timeline significantly. The orbital defense platform operation that had been scheduled for the following week would need to happen tonight, before the Council could establish more comprehensive surveillance. Marcus responded first, reporting that his infiltration of the Spaceport Authority had revealed increased security measures around all off-world transportation. Lisa confirmed that communication monitoring had been expanded to include previously unsecured channels. David reported that Council administrative offices were implementing new identification verification procedures. The pattern was clear. The Council was preparing for some kind of security operation, possibly a sweep designed to identify resistance operatives. Sarah spent the afternoon preparing for what might be her final day, maintaining her cover identity. She served customers, processed transactions, and maintained her persona as a simple electronics trader, while simultaneously coordinating the most complex operation her resistance cell had ever attempted. The ability to manage multiple complex tasks simultaneously was another human advantage that the Council had failed to recognize. Where other species required dedicated focus for complex operations, humans could maintain peak performance across several concurrent activities. The collaborative human from the previous night returned to her thoughts throughout the day. Sarah had sent detailed reports about the woman to Resistance Command, but no response had been received yet. The existence of human collaborators posed a serious threat to all resistance operations, as they would understand human capabilities and methodologies in ways that Council security never could. If the woman was providing intelligence about human resistance activities, it could explain why the Council was suddenly taking more aggressive action. As evening approached, Sarah began implementing the shutdown procedures for her shop and cover identity. The electronic devices on display were actually sophisticated communication and coordination tools that would be needed for the night's operation. The primitive human technology that had amused Council officials like Vextar would soon demonstrate capabilities that would shatter their understanding of human potential. The plan was ambitious even by Resistance standards. Sarah's cell would simultaneously strike at 3 key installations: the orbital defense platform that protected the system's primary military base, the communication hub that coordinated Council operations throughout the sector, and the administrative center that controlled the slave labor assignments. Success would require precise timing, advanced technology, and the kind of adaptive thinking that was uniquely human. Sarah sealed her shop for what would likely be the last time, activating security measures that would ensure no useful intelligence could be extracted from the building if the Council discovered her true identity. The 3 years she had spent building her cover had been valuable, but the time for subtlety was ending. The Council was about to learn what happened when they underestimated humanity's capacity for strategic thinking and coordinated action. As she made her way through the evening crowds toward the rendezvous point, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. The Council's greatest advantage, their ability to categorize and control different species based on assumed limitations, had become their greatest vulnerability. They had created a system designed to manage predictable beings with fixed capabilities, but humans refused to fit into their categories. Tonight would prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't any single ability, but rather their refusal to accept that any limitation was permanent. The rendezvous point was a maintenance tunnel beneath the city's main transportation hub, a location chosen specifically because most galactic species found the confined space and industrial noise unbearable for extended periods. Humans, however, had evolved in environments that required them to function effectively in cramped, noisy, and dangerous conditions. What other species saw as hostile territory, humans saw as tactical advantage. Sarah arrived first, using the time to conduct final equipment checks and review the mission parameters one last time. The Resistance had spent months infiltrating human slaves into key positions throughout the target installations, each one carefully selected and trained for this moment. Unlike other species, humans could maintain deep cover for years without showing signs of psychological strain, their social adaptability allowing them to genuinely become the roles they were playing, while never losing sight of their true objectives. Marcus emerged from a different tunnel entrance, his 3 years working within the Spaceport Authority, having taught him to move through the city's infrastructure like a native Zephyrian. His reports indicated that the orbital defense platform's shift rotations would create a brief window of vulnerability at precisely 23:47 local time. The timing was critical because human coordination abilities allowed for split-second synchronization across multiple targets, something that would be impossible for species that required extended communication protocols. Lisa arrived carrying what appeared to be standard maintenance equipment but actually contained the most advanced electronic warfare tools the Resistance had developed. Her infiltration of the communication hub had revealed that the Council's quantum encryption could be broken using human mathematical insights that approached the problem from directions that other species had never considered. Where alien minds followed logical progressions, human brains made intuitive leaps that could shortcut complex calculations. David was the last to arrive, his administrative position having required him to maintain his cover until the final possible moment. His intelligence indicated that the collaborative human woman Sarah had observed was indeed providing detailed information about Resistance operations to the Council. More concerning, she had access to psychological profiles of human Resistance operatives and was helping the Council develop new interrogation techniques specifically designed to break human mental conditioning. "We have a problem," David reported as the team gathered in the tunnel's central chamber. The collaborator has identified at least 12 resistance cells operating throughout Council space. She's scheduled to brief the Security Council tomorrow morning about human resistance capabilities and recommended countermeasures. If we don't stop her tonight, the entire resistance network could be compromised within weeks. Sarah processed this information while continuing to prepare her equipment. The mission had just become significantly more complex, but humans had evolved to handle rapidly changing tactical situations. Where other species required time to adjust their plans when new information emerged, humans could improvise and adapt in real time. Can we modify our objectives to include her elimination? Negative, Marcus replied. She's in the high-security section of the administrative complex, and any attempt to reach her would compromise our primary mission. We'll have to trust that Command can handle the collaborator situation through other means. The decision reflected another human strength, the ability to prioritize objectives and accept acceptable losses when necessary. The team moved through the tunnel system toward their respective targets, using routes that had been mapped by human maintenance workers over the course of months. The Council's security protocols were designed around the assumption that hostile forces would use direct approaches and conventional tactics. They had never considered the possibility that their enemies might spend years learning their systems from the inside, identifying weaknesses and vulnerabilities that could be exploited simultaneously across multiple installations. Sarah's route to the orbital defense platform took her through the industrial sector, where the night shift was populated almost entirely by human slaves working under minimal supervision. The Council's confidence in their control systems had made them careless about monitoring slave populations, assuming that the shock collars and neural implants they used would prevent any coordinated resistance. What they hadn't realized was that humans had developed methods for communicating and coordinating that bypassed their technological controls entirely. As she moved through the factory complex, Sarah exchanged subtle signals with human workers who had been preparing for this night for months. Each worker had been assigned specific tasks that would create cascading failures throughout the industrial infrastructure when activated simultaneously. The beauty of the plan was that each individual action appeared to be a minor equipment malfunction or worker error, but collectively they would create a system-wide crisis that would overwhelm Council security response capabilities. The orbital defense platform loomed above the city like a metallic moon, its weapon arrays capable of destroying any ship that approached the system without proper authorization codes. What the Council didn't know was that human engineers had been working on the platform's construction and maintenance for the past 2 years, gradually introducing modifications that would allow the Resistance to take control of the entire system. Sarah reached the platform's service entrance exactly on schedule, using access codes that had been acquired through months of careful observation and social engineering. The human guards who were stationed throughout the facility had been gradually replacing their alien counterparts through a carefully orchestrated campaign of transfers and reassignments. By the time the Council realized what was happening, humans would control every critical system on the platform. The facility's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers designed for multiple species, but Sarah moved through it with the confidence of someone who had studied every blueprint and maintenance report. Human spatial reasoning abilities allowed her to navigate complex three-dimensional environments more effectively than most galactic species, a skill that proved invaluable in situations like this. She reached the platform's central control room just as the first phase of the operation began. Throughout the city below, human workers were initiating the coordinated equipment failures that would create the distraction needed for the Resistance to complete their objectives. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout the industrial sector as power grid fluctuations, transportation system malfunctions, and communication network disruptions spread across the city. The platform's alien crew responded exactly as the Resistance had predicted, focusing their attention on the crisis below, while maintaining minimal security on the platform itself. This was another example of Council overconfidence. They simply couldn't imagine that their primitive, human slaves were capable of coordinating such a complex operation. Sarah activated the quantum override device that Lisa had developed, using mathematical principles that the Council's best scientists had dismissed as impossible. The platform's control systems began responding to her commands as human code overwrote the alien programming that had controlled the weapons arrays. Within minutes, the most powerful defensive installation in the sector would be under complete human control. As she worked, Sarah couldn't help but think about the broader implications of what they were accomplishing. The Council had spent decades building their empire on the assumption that they could categorize and control every species they encountered. Tonight, humanity was proving that their greatest strength was their refusal to be categorized at all. The orbital defense platform's massive weapon arrays turned slowly in their mountings as Sarah's override codes took complete control of the targeting systems. Below, the city of New Zephyr spread out like a circuit board, its lights flickering as the coordinated infrastructure failures continued to cascade through every major system. The Council's emergency response teams were completely overwhelmed, exactly as the Resistance had planned. Sarah's wrist communicator vibrated with confirmation signals from her team members. Marcus had successfully infiltrated the spaceport's control center and was now redirecting incoming and outgoing traffic to prevent Council reinforcements from reaching the planet. Lisa had taken control of the sector's communication hub, cutting off the Council's ability to coordinate their response or call for help from neighboring systems. David had managed to access the administrative databases and was downloading critical intelligence about Council operations throughout the galaxy. The beauty of the human approach was that each team member could adapt their tactics in real time, based on changing conditions. Where other species followed rigid protocols that could be predicted and countered, humans excelled at improvisation and creative problem-solving. When Marcus discovered that the spaceport had backup communication systems that weren't in the original intelligence reports, he simply used his knowledge of human psychology to convince the alien technicians that the systems needed to be shut down for emergency maintenance. Sarah monitored the platform's sensor arrays as she worked, watching Council security forces scramble to respond to what they perceived as a series of unrelated system failures. The aliens' compartmentalized thinking prevented them from recognizing the coordinated nature of the attack until it was far too late to mount an effective defense. They were responding to each crisis individually rather than understanding that they were facing a single, unified operation. The platform's weapons control room was a marvel of galactic engineering, designed to accommodate crew members from dozens of different species. Sarah moved between the control stations with an efficiency that would have impressed the platform's designers, but her true advantage was not her familiarity with the technology. Humans had an almost unique ability to understand complex systems by intuition, grasping the relationships between different components in ways that purely logical species found difficult to comprehend. As she initiated the final sequence that would give the Resistance complete control over the platform's weapons, Sarah's enhanced hearing detected something that made her freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside, moving with a rhythm and pattern that was distinctly human. The collaborative woman from the nightclub had somehow tracked her to the platform. Sarah quickly activated the platform's internal security monitors, using the very system she had just captured to observe the approaching threat. The collaborative human was indeed moving through the facility, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a squad of Council security forces and appeared to be directing their movements with an authority that suggested high-level integration into the command structure. The situation had become far more dangerous than Sarah had anticipated. A human collaborator would understand Resistance tactics and capabilities in ways that alien security forces never could. She would know how humans thought, how they adapted to changing situations, and how they used their unique abilities to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Worse, she would be able to predict Sarah's likely responses and counter them effectively. Sarah activated her emergency communication protocols, sending coded warnings to her team members while continuing to complete the weapons platform takeover. The Resistance had always known that human collaborators posed the greatest possible threat to their operations, but they had hoped to avoid direct confrontation until they were better prepared. Tonight, that luxury was being stripped away. The footsteps were getting closer, and Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of Council energy weapons being charged for combat. She had perhaps 3 minutes before the security team reached the control room, which meant she needed to complete her mission and prepare for what would likely be her final battle. The thought didn't frighten her as much as it might have years earlier. Humans had evolved to function effectively under extreme stress, and Sarah had spent years training for exactly this kind of situation. She initiated the final transfer protocols that would give Resistance Command Complete Remote control over the platform's weapon systems. Once the transfer was complete, the Resistance would be able to target Council installations throughout the sector, effectively ending their military dominance in this region of space. The psychological impact would be even more significant than the tactical advantage. The Council's other subject species would realize that rebellion was not only possible but achievable. The control room's doors sealed automatically as Sarah activated the platform's emergency lockdown procedures. The measure would only delay the security team for a few minutes, but those minutes might be enough to ensure that her mission succeeded, even if she didn't survive to see the results. Humans had always been willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of their species, a trait that other galactic races found both admirable and terrifying. Sarah drew her weapon and prepared to make her final stand in the heart of the Council's most sophisticated military installation. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. A species that the Council had classified as technologically primitive was about to destroy their orbital defenses using their own technology against them. The collaborative human approaching through the corridors represented humanity's greatest weakness, but Sarah herself represented their greatest strength. As the security team began cutting through the sealed doors, Sarah received one final communication from her team members. Marcus had successfully redirected a Council supply convoy to crash into the spaceport's main fuel depot, creating a massive explosion that would prevent any ships from launching for at least 12 hours. Lisa had uploaded a virus into the communication network that would continue spreading throughout Council space, gradually degrading their ability to coordinate military operations. David had transmitted critical intelligence about Council military positions to resistance cells throughout the galaxy. The mission had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Regardless of what happened in the next few minutes, Sarah smiled grimly as she took position behind the control room's main console, her weapon trained on the door that was now beginning to glow from the cutting torches outside. The Council was about to learn the hardest lesson of all, and that underestimating humanity's capacity for strategic thinking and coordinated action was a mistake they would not live to repeat. The door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal, and Sarah found herself face to face with the collaborative human woman who had chosen to betray her own species for alien masters. The woman's eyes held a cold intelligence that Sarah recognized immediately. This was another human who had learned to adapt and survive, but who had chosen a different path entirely. The collaborative human stepped through the destroyed doorway with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning to navigate between two worlds. She was tall, well-dressed, and carried herself with the bearing of Council nobility, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence that marked her as unmistakably human. Behind her, the Council security forces maintained defensive positions, while she surveyed the control room with professional interest. Sarah Chen, formerly of the Earth Defense Corps, currently operating under the identity of electronics trader Mira Vasquez, the woman said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had spent decades speaking galactic standard. I must admit your resistance cell has exceeded my expectations. The coordination you've demonstrated tonight is quite impressive for a supposedly primitive species. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the woman, while her mind raced through tactical options. The collaborator's knowledge of her background meant that human intelligence networks had been more thoroughly compromised than anyone had realized. I don't believe we've been introduced, Sarah replied, buying time while she assessed the security team's positions and equipment. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Senior Human Resources Specialist for the Galactic Council. The woman responded with what might have been pride or mockery. I've been helping the Council understand the full potential of human capabilities for the past 8 years. Your species has such fascinating psychological and cognitive traits when properly channeled. The name sent a chill through Sarah's enhanced memory systems. Elena Vasquez had been one of Earth's leading xenopsychologists before the Council invasion, a researcher who had specialized in interspecies communication and cultural adaptation. Her work had been crucial in establishing early human resistance networks, which meant her betrayal represented a catastrophic security breach that went far beyond simple collaboration. 12 resistance cells compromised, 47 operatives captured, and detailed psychological profiles of over 300 resistance members. Elena continued conversationally. The Council has been very pleased with my contributions to their security operations. In return, I've been given access to technologies and resources that your underground movement could never provide. Sarah noticed that the Council security forces were maintaining their positions rather than advancing into the room. Either they were concerned about the weapons platform's internal defenses, or Elena had convinced them that a human-to-human conversation might yield better intelligence than a direct assault. Both possibilities suggested that Sarah still had options available. "What I find most interesting about your current situation," Elena said, moving closer to the central control console, "is how perfectly it demonstrates the fundamental flaw in human resistance thinking. You've spent years developing elaborate plans to capture this facility, but you never considered that someone else might have anticipated your every move. The platform's weapon systems were still under Sarah's control, and she realized that Elena's apparent confidence might be misplaced. The collaborator clearly understood human psychology and tactics, but she might not fully comprehend the technological capabilities that the Resistance had developed. Sarah began subtly activating backup systems while maintaining the appearance of a cornered operative. The Council initially saw humans as a useful but limited resource," Elena continued. "Strong enough for manual labor, intelligent enough to operate basic equipment but lacking the specialized capabilities that would make them truly valuable. I've helped them understand that human adaptability makes your species incredibly dangerous when properly motivated, but equally valuable when those motivations are correctly aligned." Sarah's enhanced hearing detected subtle changes in the platform's operational sounds that indicated her team's remote access protocols were still functioning. Marcus, Lisa, and David were continuing their operations from their respective positions, which meant the Resistance still had options available even if Sarah herself was captured or killed. The knowledge gave her a new appreciation for human resilience and redundancy planning. "You're assuming that capturing me will somehow stop what we've started tonight," Sarah said, her finger hovering over the manual override controls that would complete the weapons platform transfer. "But humans don't depend on single points of failure the way other species do. We learned a long time ago that survival requires distributed leadership and redundant systems." Elena's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that Sarah had identified a weakness in the collaborators' understanding. "Perhaps, but you're also assuming that your team members are still operational. Commander Vextar's security forces have been quite thorough in their response to tonight's activities. Your friend Marcus is currently surrounded at the spaceport. Lisa's position at the communication hub has been compromised, and David—" Elena paused dramatically. "David has been working for the Council for over a year." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, but her training kicked in before she could fully process the emotional impact. If David had been a double agent, then the Council had detailed intelligence about Resistance operations that went far beyond what Elena alone could have provided. The entire mission might have been anticipated from the beginning, which meant that everything they had accomplished tonight could be part of a larger Council operation. But humans had evolved to function effectively even when their fundamental assumptions about reality were challenged. Sarah's mind immediately began developing alternative scenarios and backup plans based on this new information. If the Council had anticipated their attack, then the Resistance's response would need to be equally unpredictable. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said, her hand moving toward the console's emergency controls. "Humans are incredibly dangerous when properly motivated. But you've made the same mistake the Council always makes. You've assumed that you understand our true capabilities." Sarah activated the platform's self-destruct sequence while simultaneously uploading the weapons control codes to every Resistance cell in the galaxy. The move was desperate and destructive, but it would prevent the Council from using their own facilities against human populations while providing the Resistance with detailed intelligence about Council military capabilities. Elena's confident expression vanished as alarms began sounding throughout the platform. "You're willing to die to prevent us from gaining control of one facility? That's hardly a strategic victory." "This was never about one facility," Sarah replied as emergency lighting bathed the control room in red shadows. "This was about proving that humans refuse to be controlled, categorized, or predicted. You've spent 8 years helping the Council understand us, but you've forgotten the most important thing about our species. The platform's structural integrity warnings were becoming more urgent as the self-destruct sequence progressed. Elena and her security team would need to evacuate soon or risk being caught in the explosion that would destroy the sector's primary military installation. "What's that?" Elena asked, her professional curiosity apparently overriding her concern for immediate safety. Sarah smiled as she prepared for her final act of defiance. "We never surrender and we never stop adapting. You may have helped them capture this battle, but you've just given us everything we need to win the war." The explosion that destroyed the orbital defense platform could be seen from the surface of Zephyr Prime, a brilliant flash that briefly turned night into day across the planet's northern hemisphere. In the months that followed, historians would mark this moment as the beginning of the end for the Galactic Council's empire, though few understood the true significance of what had occurred in those final moments aboard the station. Elena Vasquez had escaped the platform's destruction, but the intelligence she carried died with Sarah Chen in the control room's inferno. What the Council never learned was that Sarah's final act had uploaded complete technical specifications for every Council military installation to resistance networks throughout the galaxy. More importantly, she had transmitted detailed psychological profiles of collaborative humans, providing the Resistance with tools to identify and counter future betrayals. The Resistance cells that received Sarah's final transmission discovered something remarkable in the data. The collaborative humans weren't random traitors who had chosen personal survival over species loyalty. They were individuals who had been systematically identified and recruited by the Council, based on specific psychological profiles that made them susceptible to certain forms of manipulation. Understanding these patterns allowed the Resistance to protect vulnerable members while developing counter-recruitment strategies. 6 months after the destruction of the orbital platform, Marcus emerged from the underground networks that had hidden him following his escape from the spaceport. The Council had assumed he was dead, killed in the massive explosion that had destroyed their fuel depot, but humans had always excelled at using their enemies' assumptions against them. He now led a resistance cell that had grown from the original 4 members to over 200 operatives spread across 12-star systems. Lisa had used her control of the communication hub to plant sleeper viruses throughout the Council's information networks. These programs lay dormant for months, gathering intelligence and mapping system vulnerabilities before activating simultaneously across hundreds of installations. When they finally revealed themselves, they brought down the Council's ability to coordinate military operations across 3 entire sectors of space. The revelation of David's betrayal had initially devastated Resistance morale, but it ultimately proved to be another example of human adaptability, overcoming adversity. Analysis of his activities revealed patterns that allowed the Resistance to identify other potential double agents, while developing new security protocols that made future infiltration far more difficult. The intelligence networks that had seemed compromised actually became stronger and more secure. Commander Vextar spent his final days trying to understand how the Council had so thoroughly underestimated human capabilities. His reports to the High Command became increasingly desperate as he documented instance after instance of humans accomplishing supposedly impossible tasks through methods that defied galactic understanding of species limitations. His final communication before his own death in a Resistance ambush contained a warning that would go unheeded. They are not a Class 7 species. They never were. The Council's xenobiologists continued to insist that humans were technologically and cognitively inferior right up until human fleets began appearing in systems that should have been impossible for them to reach. The primitive technology that Council officials had dismissed as curiosities turned out to be sophisticated stealth and communication systems that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Every human slave who had been sold or traded throughout Council space was actually a potential Resistance operative with access to advanced technology and training. Elena Vasquez eventually realized that her cooperation with the Council had been part of a larger human strategy that she had never fully understood. The Resistance had always known that some humans would be turned by their captors, and they had prepared for this possibility by feeding false information through channels that were likely to be compromised. Her betrayals had actually helped the Resistance by providing the Council with misleading intelligence that made their security responses predictable and ineffective. The war that followed lasted only 18 months, but it changed the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy forever. Species that had been enslaved or dominated by the Council for centuries suddenly realized that rebellion was not only possible but inevitable. The human example inspired liberation movements throughout Council space, each one adapting human tactics to their own unique capabilities and circumstances. When the final Council stronghold fell, it was defended not by the advanced alien technologies that had once seemed invincible, but by human collaborators who had finally understood the true scope of what they had helped to destroy. Elena Vasquez died in the ruins of the Council's capital, still believing that she had made the rational choice by siding with the more powerful faction. She never understood that human power had never come from superior technology or physical capabilities. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Council Empire was fundamentally different from anything that had existed before. Where the old order had been based on rigid hierarchies and species-based limitations, the new systems emphasized adaptability, cooperation, and the idea that any limitation could be overcome through creativity and determination. Human diplomatic corps, trained in the same adaptive thinking that had won the war, helped establish new alliances based on mutual respect rather than dominance. Years later, when historians studied the resistance documents that had survived the war, they found Sarah Chen's final message, transmitted in the seconds before the orbital platform's destruction. It contained not tactical information or strategic intelligence, but a simple statement that had become the unofficial motto of the human resistance. We are what we choose to become, not what others expect us to be. The message had been broadcast simultaneously to every human in Council space, but its true audience had always been the future. Sarah had known that the war would eventually end, but she had also understood that humanity's greatest challenge would come afterward, when they would need to build something better than what they had destroyed. Her legacy lived on in the countless humans who continued to adapt, innovate, and refused to accept that any challenge was insurmountable. In the end, the Council's greatest mistake had not been underestimating human intelligence or technological capabilities. Their fatal error had been assuming that humans could be defined and controlled like every other species they had encountered. Humanity's true strength had always been their refusal to be anything other than what they chose to become, and that choice had ultimately reshaped the galaxy itself.